Hello, everyone. I am Winsome Wade, Senior Advisor to the Global Science of Learning Education Network, or GSOLEN. We're so glad you're joining us today to hear from this panel who are working so hard to ensure high quality curriculum through education technology to diverse geographies in India. Today's session is a 90-minute session. We have the first hour of presentation from the panelists, and then we'll be opening it up for a 30-minute discussion with you using the chat box feature. Back in the late spring of this year, GSOLEN launched a 3-part webinar series around science of learning and digital learning. The series was built from a book by Dr. Tracy Tokuhama Espinosa entitled Bringing the Neuroscience of Learning to Online Teaching. Since then, a small group of us worked together to form what we're calling the Digital Learning Working Group to further explore and deepen our understanding of science of learning and digital learning. One of our speakers, Jyoti, is actually a member of the Digital Learning Working Group, and she and her panelists are here today to share their work that they're doing through EdTech across India. But before we actually turn it over to the panelists, I'm going to turn to GSOLEN's coordinator, Governor Bob Wise. He's going to give us some opening remarks, contextualizing this work in the broader GSOLEN's mission and in the moment of COVID-19. So Bob.
Thank you very much, Winston, and thank you to everyone who's joined. These working groups are very exciting that GSOLEN is forming because people, and we encourage anyone who's either wants to join a working group or suggest one, please do so. What are the common problems that we're facing that we can use the best research and strategies from across the world and then adapt to our own situation? That's really what GSOLEN is about. If you think about it for a moment, the reality is that we're coming out of a situation, I hope we're coming out of a situation where 1.5 billion students across the world were out of school for some period of time, 63 to 66 million teachers, and it's an incredible disruption to almost every education system in the world. But also what is I find encouraging out of all this is that OECD reports that 80% of its members say that when as they rebuild, restore, return to school, they want to make sure that those schools are improved after COVID, better than what existed before COVID. So what this is about now for education leaders across the world is how does science influence their decisions, and how it influence both the short-term decisions, how they return to in-person schooling, at the same time also addressing long-term decisions. How do we make our systems better, and sharing that information. So I want to thank everyone for the participation and look forward to the discussion today. This panel and this working group will have a lot to say, I think, in policy making and practice decisions across the world. Thank you, Winston.
Great. Thank you, Bob. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to you, Arjun, Jyoti, and Kevin. And Kevin, you're actually kicking us off, so over to you.
Thanks, Winston. Thanks, Bob and GSOLEN. So it's a pleasure to be here. Very briefly, because I know time is tight. I founded the Common Ground Collaborative about 10 years ago, I guess. Before that, had been involved in initiating the IB Primary Years Program and a group of other initiatives in terms of mainly international education, and also led schools, big schools, small schools in different places. Very briefly, the Common Ground Collaborative is a nonprofit network. It's really a global conversation, and it's reaching a very diverse range of places. Last week, I keynoted the annual conference of the Chilean National Council for Education, but I also worked with a tiny startup kindergarten in Oyster Bay, Tanzania. So we're working with small schools, big schools, national systems. Just to kind of, they say never start with an apology, but what I'm going to do is pretty much a yakathon. It's going to be a drink from a fire hose, which is not, I just want to say it's not our normal style. Normally, the work we do is very much constructivist, processing together, co-creating, but in the interest of time, I'm going to talk you through an overview of what we've called a global learning ecosystem for our times. I'm going to start by sharing screen. I'm assuming that's visible to everybody, yeah? Yeah, thank you for the nod, Winsome. So it's a big claim, isn't it? A global learning ecosystem. You know, think big. It's I think we have to be aspirational. As Bob said, there's billions of kids out there, as Jyoti knows, billions of kids, not just a handful of kids who are not getting the quality of education they deserve. And as a full-on practitioner, I also am the director of teaching and learning in a school in South America, in Honduras. You know, really working on the ground with ordinary teachers, ordinary kids. We have to be able to reach those kids to reach the claim of anything global has to be not just the, you know, inside a wealth bubble. So I'm just going to talk you through the thinking, then hand over to Joe and Arjun to talk about how we're using these ideas and technology together to reach large numbers of kids. So why do that? Why do that? Joe and I have been in this business a long time. We've been in the learning game a long time. We're still at it, full on, early in the morning, late at night. Why do it? Why bother? So as Cynic reminded us, start with why. For me personally, I think the three of us today agree. I just think we've let the whole system become massively overcomplicated. I see schools confounded by complexity and constrained by compliance, constrained by bureaucracy, jumping through hoops, wasting energy on things that have no learning impact, but for somebody else's bureaucratic satisfaction. See gaps everywhere, gaps between sections of the school, which we also ironically sometimes call divisions. We talk about one school, but we call them divisions. Gaps between disciplines, gaps between what we know and what we do, gaps between parents and any kind of comprehension of school as a place where they can be a partner, gaps between kids and what they could be learning, and gaps between what we promise in policy and what we deliver in practice. So there's a big why there for me. It's a systemic, system-wide overburdening with complexity and lack of system. So my goal is simplicity and system. We're going to add scalability when Joe and Arjun kick in. But for now, let's look at how do we bring simplicity to all this complexity without losing meaning. I loved Einstein's comment when asked to explain the theory of relativity to a public audience. Can you make it simple? And he said, I'll make it as simple as possible and no simpler than that. So simple without dumbing down. Pascal, who said to his friend, my apologies, if I'd had time, I'd have written a shorter letter. And Saint-Exupéry, who said, some people think perfect is when we've added everything we can. I think perfect is when we've taken away everything we can. So simple, not simplistic, and always systemic. The big goal, the big impact really is that every kid gets the kind of learning I'm going to unpack in the next few minutes. And that means every adult, not just the teachers, the family. We like to think of the schools we work with. We think of their parents as learning families. Parents joining us for different kinds of inquiry-based sessions about what they want for their kids that they didn't get when they were in school. So bringing simplicity, high learning impact, system to the entire community in communities all over the world. So massive, massive, unreal aspiration. In another book, The Infinite Game, Simon Sinek talked about the just cause, the people, those of us in it for the long haul, the just cause that is so aspirational, you'll never reach it, but it keeps you going for decades. Because if the goal is every kid gets a great education, how could we reach that? But on the other hand, which percentage of kids do we want to say won't get a good education? So I kind of look at it that way. But what do we do about that? Otherwise, it's just a dream. We approached it through inquiry. I'm a big believer in inquiry as a learning tool, not just for kids, but for leaders. Actually, change management as inquiry. So we approached this whole massive task through inquiry, and we identified 5 essential questions. And those questions created the system. First question was, what is learning? What is the learning process? How can we work on learning? How can we have a science of learning if we don't share a simple, agreed definition of the learning process? Deming of total quality management fame, who transformed Japanese industry after the Second World War, used to say, if you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. And that really resonates with me. If you can't describe it as a process, you don't know what you're doing. So we said we will define the process of learning and we'll keep it simple. When we've decided how we learn, we still have the content question. What's worth learning? So we start with what is learning and then what's worth learning. What's worth learning and why for these kids right now all over the world? And then all of them, we say all of them, so diversify. That key question is, how do all learners access learning? How do all adults access opportunity in a school? How do we bring genuine equity, diversity, and inclusion to schools? And then how do we deliver on that promise? How do we teach for learning? And how do we build learning cultures in every classroom, in every school? And then sort of the $64,000 question, how do the kids provide evidence of what they've learned? Not how do we test them? How do the kids provide evidence of their own learning? So 5 questions, 1 ecosystem. What is learning? What's worth learning? How do all learners access learning? How do we create learning cultures? How do the learners provide evidence of their own learning? So what I'm going to do in the next 25 minutes and 10 seconds is work through those Ds, and then a few thoughts before I hand over to Joe and Arjun. So what is learning? Again, we found simplicity. We looked at Princeton University Press, how people learn, other research bases, obviously. We said experts are experts in the ideas of their field and the relationships among them. And I directly taught that to 4th and 5th grade last week. Experts are experts in the ideas of their field and the relationships among those ideas. So we need a conceptual learning approach. Experts are also highly skilled in their field, so we need to teach for competency, and we'd like to produce expert human beings, finally. So we work on character. Simplicity. All the schools we work with all over the world talk about the 3 C's: conceptual, competency, character, learning. Then we said, but if it's a process, it needs to drive the teaching process. So for this audience, this is very straightforward. This is distilled constructivism. That's all it is, distilled inquiry. You'll see on the screen, you're familiar with all of this. We must start with connecting to the kids' current learning, prior knowledge, current conceptions. Through inquiry, through questioning, through evidence gathering, through searching for truth in that evidence, lack of bias, etc. We help them construct their next more sophisticated, deeper theory, and then check it out in different contexts until it's ready to share. So a simple process of connect, construct, contribute. I'm very familiar with more complex inquiry models. I'm also familiar with seeing teachers asking, does this go in this box? Is this stage or this stage? Honestly, as a practitioner, when I hear teachers saying, does this go in this box? I always think we're too complicated. So, and we created a language around each of these C's. I used to think that, now I understand that. And we insist on the that. We're generally not a pedantic organization, but that gives precision. When a kid has to say, now I understand that, and have to finish that sentence, they can't just say, now I understand more about renewable energy sources. They have to tell us what it is they understand about renewable energy sources. So for me, and this kind of just fits with a personal internal model, I think, that kind of lifelong deepening of understanding. Wiggins and McTighe told us, understanding happens by degree. We work very closely with UBD, we're literally very closely with Jay McTighe. He's one of our sort of allies. Lifelong process, connect, construct, contribute, teaching it to the kids, always teaching the kids intentionally, metacognitively, the actual strategies. For competency, equally important, different process. Provide models, deconstruct them with the kids, co-construct, identify where the kids are against good performance, good product, practice to close the gap until we are able to. character, putting the kids in authentic circumstances, have them consider how to act appropriately with good moral intent, act like that, reflect on it, until over time we become more compassionate, patient, reflective, resilient. So a learning process definition in response to the question, what is learning? Because we see ourselves as building experts, I'm a huge believer in planning for impact rather than output and input first. So that's the goal. Every kid, a learning expert. Jim Collins' book, the classic Good to Great, he talked about the hedgehog principle. The one thing that you can do better than anyone else that you're passionate about and defines your identity. In the schools we're working with, they're saying it's just this. Here's a mission for you. Every kid will leave our school with deep conceptual understanding of ideas that matter, high levels of competency in key skills, and strong, positive moral character. The kids get it, the teachers get it, and we have a pedagogy to go with it. Because we need that simplicity, because we need a shared learning language, because schools are cultures and cultures share languages. So parents and kids are able to talk about what they used to think, what they now understand, et cetera, et cetera. So a new dinner table conversation, not what did you do in school today? Nothing, rien, nada. Every country I've worked in, I ask parents that question. How do you find out what your kids are doing? We say, what did you do in school today? And what do your kids say? Nothing. We can offer a different dinner table conversation. If we had processing time, just have a think about the opportunities provided if every teacher planned to, by the end of this module, in my discipline, I need the kids to understand that, be able to become more. John Hattie's work, of the 10 highest impact, highest affect sizes in his research, 2 of them, teacher clarity, collective teacher efficacy. A shared learning language, shared ways of planning, shared ways of assessing, teacher clarity, collective teacher efficacy. So 3 spirals interacting, a triple helix, the DNA of learning. You can already tell I'm used to making grand claims, a learning ecosystem, the DNA of learning, but it's a useful metaphor. People remember it. So what? If it's a DNA, if we extend the metaphor, DNA doesn't live in a vacuum, it inhabits a body. So what body of knowledge for these kids these days? Or as we put it, as David Perkins put it, we borrowed this from him, what's worth learning? What will actually matter to these kids after they've left their education? Just an observation, I think national systems have put us practitioners between a rock and a hard place. They sit in rooms and every single discipline is working separately, Common Core, for example. No scientist is going to risk leaving out any item of science. No mathematician is going to leave anything out. So they produce endless lists of standards. They give those lists to schools and say, here, turn these lists into learning. From my experience, schools are baffled by that challenge. Not all of them, but many of them. So they hand it to their teachers and say, here, teach these standards. And we'll do standards-based reporting and all that stuff. Physically, literally impossible. Look at Marzano's research. We don't have the time to teach all those standards. So then you get a second movement, the power standards movement. We've put teachers between the rock and a hard place of, I'll teach all this superficially and feel badly about it, or I'll leave something out, not knowing why and feel badly about it. We took on the challenge of getting teachers out from between a rock and a hard place by doing the work ourselves as an organization. We started by saying, what's worth learning is what makes us common as human beings. That's why we're called the Common Ground Collaborative. We all seek meaning in our lives. We want to believe we're part of a purpose bigger than ourselves. We need to find well-being, all forms of well-being. We seek to understand how the world works by looking at the patterns and the principles of math and science, but not just math and science, of society, of leadership. It's all patterns in the end. We need to build sustainable societies and sustainable ecosystems. All the evidence shows that civilizations collapse when 2 things come together. environmental degradation and social stratification. That's exactly what we're looking at now. Massive divide between the rich and the poor, and we're destroying all of our resources. I live in Honduras. That's what the Mayans did. You might have noticed they're not here anymore. We're all individual, but we belong to groups, and how we organize groups, their history, their geography, their economics, their government systems, determines the nature of human society. And how we treat people who are not in our group is what's destroying some countries. Right now, I won't need to mention examples. When you look at the divisions in some countries now, because of people working group instincts to their own political advantage. It's very, very destructive, and kids need to understand what's going on. We're all storytellers. We use language. We send messages to each other for different purposes, using different genre, different media. And we're all capable of great creativity, of having a concept, making it real, whether it's a ballet, a sculpture, a new technological tool, the wheel, the printing press. We're the inventive species. So we've organized all content under those 6 human commonalities. Not national, not international, but actually universal commonalities. Disciplinary, yes, we work with disciplinary learning modules, science, social studies. We also work across them. Yesterday, for the first time, I worked with 8 elementary school specialists, STEM, tech, art, music. We wrote 3 connected modules called What is Beautiful? Understanding the Aesthetics in Everything. We ended up with 3 modules, sports and character working together, the beauty in teamwork, art and music, the beauty in movement, and STEM and technology, the beauty in bridges. But it started with a transdisciplinary idea, the idea of beauty. We mapped all of this onto maps that we've translated into various 2 kinds of Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic, etc. And then we said, well, great, love it. Love the idea, great philosophical idea. What's a teacher supposed to do with that? A tired teacher on a Monday morning in, you name the location, as the kids are coming through the door. We said, first of all, we're going to capture this at the school-wide level. And for each of the commonalities, we created a transfer goal. We're working closely with Jay McTighe on transfer goals. Really big idea. What should the kids leave with that they'll take with them for the rest of their lives? We said a person who can live with purpose and balance, manage their resources, their energy, their passions, solve complex problems using sound reasoning based on a deep understanding of causation. I won't read them all, but you kind of get the idea, the graduating outcomes. But how do we work towards achieving that? We developed a matrix in sort of old curricular language, a scope and sequence, organized under 6 human commonalities, comprising powerful learning modules driven by compelling questions. Questions like the one I did last week with grades 4 and 5. How does money work? Why do we fight? Why learn? How do wolves change rivers? What is beautiful? What is anti-racism? Ideas that matter framed into powerful inquiry-based modules. But we also recognize a kind of duty to provide the answer to this question, again, at Grant Wiggins, Jan McTighe, coverage, but also uncoverage. So we mapped the familiar curriculum documents like C3, NGSS, converted them into conceptual competency character, embedded them in powerful learning modules so schools don't have to work out how to do that. So we have coverage, the uncoverage of big ideas and enduring understandings through the uses of questions and inquiry in a spiraling way so that kids hit the concept at least 4 times when they're in school because, again, Grant Wiggins, Jan McTighe, understanding happens by degree. We create simple learning modules. The why are we learning this anyway? The what, conceptual goals, competency goals, character goals, and then the backward design thing, the assessment systems, and then how do we teach it? Framing questions and what we call formative learning sequences. Sometimes we get the kids involved in more open inquiry. We say to the kids, if you could only learn one thing this year, tell me what it is, but give it to me as a question. Why can't I bring a gun to school? One kid asked me in China. Kids have interesting questions. Working with teachers, what would you fight to teach? And showing them how we can get that into the curriculum. Sometimes working in fully transdisciplinary ways. I gave one example about beauty. This one's about artificial intelligence, going off schedule, different teachers tackling different areas, letting kids choose which lens they want to use to look at a problem, an economic lens, a historian's lens. So it's this system. This is the simplified version. The map, the matrix, the modules. So defining learning, conceptual, competency, character. Designing learning, the map, the matrix, the modules. Still leaves us with the trickiest of all questions, I think, and one that society is just beginning to grapple with in real ways. We are finally seeing seriousness of purpose about equity, inclusion, diversity. There is a massive scandal in my favorite sport in England right now, cricket, about institutional racism in the Yorkshire Cricket Club. And it's really tearing that club apart. And no one has been mentioning it for decades. If you're a Pakistani player, English, British, Pakistani, you know the nicknames, the subtle abuse, the putting down. We have to tackle that. Finally, we have to tackle it. When I was in Brussels, we founded Project Safe Place, which was initially to protect our kids and teachers from homophobia, but it expanded to all forms of discrimination and prejudice. And then I also founded Next Frontier Inclusion, which is still thriving around the world. I noticed that when parents left home with their children to come to Brussels, if one of their kids had a learning difference, they didn't say, oh, sorry, Mary, you won't be coming with us, but there's 2 years of sandwiches in the fridge and, you know, don't get into any trouble. They bring their kids with them. I just felt it was our duty to educate the whole family. And we did it in managed ways. Don't get me wrong, in managed ways, but we did it. Aligning purpose and policy and program and practice. Looking at different levels of capacity building. For gifted kids, I don't like the term, but for shorthand, I'll use it, for gifted kids. No wonder the system doesn't serve them well, because schools deliver curriculum in stratified grade level bands. Well, of course, if a kid thinks through the ceiling in terms of scientific understanding, of course that doesn't work for them. There are ways to absolutely serve these kids. If you have conceptually driven conceptual modules, there is no limit to how deep a kid can go, to what their questions might be. You need mentor teachers who can think at the same level of the kids, and they might come from the high school and the kid might be in second grade. But don't tell me schools couldn't possibly organize for those people to be together at some point. So this is a very brief overview, but you can see how passionate we are about this. Seeing ourselves as capacity builders, not knowledge deliverers, capacity builders. That means giving the capacity over to the kids, creating learners who are self-advocates, who know how to learn, because we've intentionally given them the strategy and the language of the strategy. When my wife teaches early childhood, all the kids know that they're now going to reread or they're going to peer edit. They have the language. It's not a mystery. So deliberately diverse schools. Inclusion, being a part of something, not being apart from something. And then the learning piece, the teaching piece, which we see as building cultures. This is Drucker, the Austrian thinker. He said, when it comes to change in schools, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Leaders come in, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. 5 years later, they leave, nothing changes because they never got in and changed the culture. What's culture? The way we do things around it. Someone said it nicely to me the other day. It's what we do when no one's watching. Culture is what we do when no one's watching. We're not being supervised. We do the right thing because that's the way we do things around here. So we have the beginnings of a culture in that common language, which can drive both the culture, because cultures need a language, and the curriculum, because we have goals under each of the 3 C's. But it's not the only thing that makes a culture. Cultures share beliefs. I'm a huge believer in, I love the work of Margaret Wheatley. Some of you will know her book, Leadership and the New Science. She said, we have in keeping with all life forms the search for freedom and order. And we find those things not in complicated rules and regulations, but in a few repeating formulae or principles within which there's personal autonomy. We've taken that model and taken it into schools. Not rules, but principles. We co-create these shared truths with the faculty. And it's one of those, somebody said, creative people can keep seemingly contradictory ideas in their head at the same time. So you might think freedom and order are contradictory, but a principle, well written, is broad enough to provide freedom, but clear enough to provide order. The beauty of this, and this is why teachers follow this, they really do get into it with real seriousness of purpose when we create these with them. They come from within, rather than being imposed on us from without. I was working in a school in Africa, and a great guy, John Kane, the middle school principal, said to me, you know, I've never minded breaking a rule, but I'd feel really bad breaking a principle. And we even have a saying, rules are made to be broken. I don't think anyone would say principles are made to be broken. This is just a sample, the kind of why principle, the purpose principle. We work for meaning. The kids should always understand the why of what they're learning, and don't expect teachers to follow a change unless they believe in the why. That we're relationship builders, and relationships have a tremendous impact on student learning. We've all got our learning stories about the teacher who inspired us or destroyed us. That we need kids to own their own learning, to have engagement and agency and efficacy. We learn by making connections. That's how the brain works. And we come to life full of wonder and curiosity. Why do we lose interest in that when they leave preschool? Wonder, curiosity, play should go all the way through our lives. When Joe and Arjun and I are working with ideas, we are playing. We're playing with ideas until the best idea emerges. And then schools don't only, get my words right, don't only share beliefs, they share norms. So we take the principles, and we turn them into norms of practice for learners, for teachers, for parents, for leaders, for governors, school-wide, and we work with all those stakeholders. Just an example, and just an illustration. I was just working with a school in Dubai, and this very interesting young teacher said to me, you know, I think about learning ownership like I think about property ownership. If I own my apartment, I look after it. I'm invested in it. I leave, but it stays mine. If I'm renting the apartment, I have a totally different relationship with it, which you can work out for yourself. So are our kids owning their learning or just renting it from us? So when they leave our school, they just leave it behind because it was just a rental apartment. So kids who own their own learning can set their own goals. So can teachers, and they can teach kids how to set their goals. And then the final D, evidence of learning. I learned this from Jay. The basis of the word assessment is the Latin word assidere, which means to sit beside or to sit with. That was the concept. How far have we come from that concept of sitting with someone to look at their learning? We work with 5 principles. The purpose of learning is to provide feedback to learners to improve their learning, teachers to inform our practice. Reliability. It's only reliable if you use multiple sources. Alignment, the assessments should match the goals. Value, since we assess what we value, we should value what we assess. Or the other way around, since we value what we assess, we should assess what we value. And equity, assessment must be fair to all learners. Feedback to improve student learning, feedback to inform our practice. And we close the circle of the 5 Ds by asking kids to do their self-assessments based on the 3 Cs. We've been learning about social equity in Bangalore. I used to think that, now I understand that, here's my evidence. I used to struggle to, now I understand, now I'm able to, here's my evidence. As a person, I think I'm becoming more, here's my evidence. We're working with a very interesting tech tool as well that gathers all that evidence in the simplest ways. So sort of curated conversations between teachers and children, which can then be shared with parents. So what is learning? What's worth learning? How do all learners access learning? How do we deliver on that promise and create learning cultures? How do the kids show us what they've learned? In practice, all over the world, honestly, truly working. It's a longer story, but it's working. 5 Ds, one learning ecosystem. So a learning ecosystem for our times. But there's a huge but. We're very small. I work personally with schools. We have a tiny team. It's not scalable. It's too personal. It's not scalable. How do we scale it? How do we get over these problems? That invisible, weird, invisible wall, the two parallel universes. The workshop went well, didn't make any difference. Teacher enjoyed the conference, but in the ride home, whatever they learned went out the window, never makes it to the classroom. The gap between policy and practice. We're working with the new Indian education policy, thanks to Joe. You couldn't write a better, modern, inclusive, constructivist, meaning-making education policy. Our judgment is there's no chance it will hit the classrooms we're talking about. No chance. We have to work out why policy doesn't become practice. Why is the regressive elastic that snaps us back to old habits stronger than the progressive elastic trying to pull us to better practices? Joe worked out years ago with Meghshala in India. She started where I've ended up. She started with this must be scalable because she's aware of the scale of the civilization and culture she lives in. One thing I've worked out, this was from Dylan Williams' work, Williams and Black. He said, those of us who design learning, we have our aha moments, our insights. We see patterns, we create tools. He said, when we deliver, it's the same things, but in reverse. You must give teachers the tools. In using the tools, they may see the patterns and have the aha moments. But to be common sensey about it, the kids will already be getting a better deal because of better tools in the classroom. We need to take this down to the lesson. I'm finding in my own school, if I don't get in and show it with the kids, the teachers still have a gap between the theoretical understanding and their own practice. This is where Jim Collins comes in, his chapter, Technology Accelerators. He said, technology won't tell us where to go, but when we know where to go, it will get us there faster. So we teamed up, Ontum and Common Ground, in on ground, nice use play on words, but we mean it. How do we get this ecosystem on the ground? We're saying simplicity and system plus scale gives us a chance of success. So not just a learning ecosystem for our times, a global learning ecosystem for our times. So that's my part of the story. I'm going to stop sharing. I hope I kept your attention. I'm going to hand over to Joe and Arjun to show how we are putting this into practice on a large scale.
Hi everyone out there. A lot of you are friends of mine. I cannot wait to see you at the end of this. Arjun and I will have a little bit of chatter, as we say, next slide, maybe or not, because we've done it in a common slide, so it'll keep breaking your attention, but Kevin held it wonderfully. Thank you, Kevin. I'm going to start where Kevin almost left off, and that is a global learning ecosystem for our times. And I think that this is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and it's going to be about as tough to get it going, right? And what Kevin touched upon was this. The trouble is always with the transfer. You know, I have had 45 years of standing up in front of classrooms. I was almost always part trainer of teachers and part teacher myself. I saw this trouble with transfer happen in the poorest of schools and in the really good international schools that I worked in. The fly in the ointment, it seems, is always in the transfer, right? The toughest of transfers is what goes from a conference into a classroom. What do you learn from an in-service training even? How does that go into the classroom? You can say, well, the conference is out in a room in some five-star hotel, and you can see that when you go back to the classroom, you flip right back. But what about in-service training, which happens in school? Still, you know, in a little bit of time, it disappears. So one of our jobs certainly is, how do you do these transfers? How do you transfer, as Kevin said, these ambitious ideas in a policy document into a working classroom? I'm going to show you a movie with some of our schools, and you will see what a working classroom looks like in a country like India with the millions of kids in it. And do they not write a policy that works? It seems as if there is an elastic band that snapped into the back of people's trousers, holding them back from good practice. It snaps people right back into the teaching that they've used whenever they began to teach. In truth, they're teaching how they were taught, and it goes back because those people who taught them were teaching as they were taught. So it's a sort of eternal move backwards into eternity, I think. The reason I'm showing you this movie is that I want you to see what we were fighting, where we are today, what kind of schools, what kind of terrain. I also want to show you the incremental changes we were able to make. You will see by the end, it leaves me sometimes completely overwhelmed, even a little emotional. And I didn't know they made emotional physics teachers, but seemingly they do occasionally. So Arjun, if you will roll that movie.
I am, it should be visible.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, I had another. So if I hold my hand up, if you will stop for the moment, and you will see in that classroom, if you just back up a little bit. Yeah, you see, these kids are sitting around a table, and this is a big step in Indian schools, because kids in Indian schools usually sit in rows facing the teacher. They're not allowed to talk to each other. They're not allowed to look out of the window. All these things happen. But here they are, they're beginning to sit around desks. And if you let it roll a little bit, and you will see an even more amazing thing. And if you stop here, this teacher is using manipulatives in front of her classroom. Notice that the kids don't all have manipulatives. And of course, 1.2 million kids are not, it's not easy to supply manipulatives to them. And if you carry on, you'll see some more interesting things. But this was a big change, that this teacher was actually using manipulatives. The change will come, when there are manipulatives on the teacher's student's desk. Now here is something so much better. They're sitting on the ground on a pallet. They're sitting in a circle. It starts, kids are beginning to talk to each other. It comes from local training. It comes from training these people by other people who come from their place. And it comes from our Android app that looks like, wait, hang on. Just go back to a minute, just a second back to that little girl who actually was, yeah, play on. That's it. So here's this little girl. Now there is stuff in her hand. She's tracing out a sand written N so that she gets the shape of the N. And now we can carry on. We can keep rolling. And here's the change. Kids are more energized. They're standing up. A kid is teaching the other kids in the class. Teachers are much more mobile. It builds a camaraderie that is unbeatable, because now suddenly teachers have become students' favorite people. So you can see how splendid it is. So to get from here, to get to this better world from where we were, was a tough call. We've done it, and it seems to work. And I have to say, I'm loving it. So if I go on to the next one, everyone says tech skills, everyone. Why we thought, why, you know, and then why it happens was because of the math in it, right? And my friends and people out there who could have been my friends, but now will hate me forever, I'm going to drag you into some math. Some of you kicking, some of you screaming, but look at this. And by the end of this, you'll see there is no option but to scale. You know, I've put up two graphs. I put them together after we started to work with the bottom of the social pyramid. And in fact, Kevin, this might be an actual use of backward by design. And the credit must, as always, go to Jay McTagg and Grant Wiggins. Anyway, back to the math. Suppose we plan to educate 100% of the children in 10 years, let's say. This is our audacious goal, right? To educate 100% of children in 10 years. So I drew two graphs. One was from 0 to 5 years, and the second was from 5 years to 15 years. And you will see that the growth is a normal growth. It's in normal populations. This is the shape of the classic growth curve. My apologies to the mathematicians here. I should have generated it from an equation, but I hand sketched it. I've drawn it so often, I thought I could pull it off. I think I might have done that. My apologies. So the world has 7.4 billion people. 2.2 billion are children in some sort of learning space. And only 0.2 of them are in first world countries. So let's stop worrying about their education. They are probably doing fine. That leaves 2 billion children for us to educate well. Worry about them. Worry about them and assume that this intervention should be finished in 10 years. Why are we in such a hurry? Let's see. I started the curve at 0.2 billion and it accelerated upwards. But wait, shall we stop at 5 years and see what is happening? We've educated 0.4 billion students and we are left with 1.8 billion to educate. The numbers should give you a hint of what is coming. The second graph shows the next 5 years, and that leaves about 1.4 billion. So we did 0.4 billion the first time, and we can only do 1.4 billion if we take in the next 10 years. We're losing the race. You know, you can see that this battle is lost today unless we scale hugely. And we can't just scale. We must actually scale with fidelity, which means the first student that heard what we said should be the same as what the last student hears that we said, right? So the process is not frittered down, it's not watered down, and only tech does that. So tech is it, you know, and we realize that we have to go through tech. Now, if you go to the next one, where it says design, it goes from aha moments to patterns to tools. And that's how it's normally done. But here's another thing that we didn't ever hear out there till we actually walked into classrooms. First generation learners usually have teachers who are also first generation learners. And hence, the rote teaching maybe, you know, this is possibly why they teach for rote learning. And this is why they rote teach. They teach exactly like they were taught. Lots of teachers do, but usually it's watered down a little bit in teachers who are not first generation learners, but in teachers that are, it's pretty standard. It's completely rote learning. So here's what we did. When we got to the deliver part that Kevin was talking about, we flipped it. We made the tools, and from the tools, the pattern slowly developed in the teacher's mind. And once the pattern developed, they suddenly had that, aha, so this is why this happens. You know, so the flipping of the tools to patterns to ahas is maybe something that works for first generation teachers. So, and we did this, and we actually worked right down to the lesson. Each lesson is a 40-minute. I'm going to hand it over to Arjun to take you forward. But each lesson is a 40-minute long slide, and we integrate various parts of CGC into each lesson. So if the teacher just follows the lesson, very soon you will come across the aha moment for a teacher. And the moment the teacher gets the aha moment, she loves it so much, for sure the kids get the same aha moment. And now, Arjun, are you ready?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And hi, everyone. Great to be here. And I'll briefly introduce myself as Joe's 9th grade physics student. And she says I must have done something wrong to be working with her later in life. I say I must have been lucky to have a teacher like her to be able to get back in touch after 20 years.
Thank you, Arjun.
So what we do with our lessons, what we did as part of On Ground, is we looked at the CGC philosophy and really wove it into what we were delivering. So, Kevin started his presentation talking about the importance of starting with why. And our lessons do the same. We teach students to question. We do that by dividing a syllabus into units or chapters, and we have a compelling question that spans the chapter. And every lesson in that chapter starts with the compelling question. And I'm going to show you some slides from a sample lesson. This is a lesson on the Indian parliamentary system, which can be taught in a very rote learning way. We upend it completely. So we start with a compelling question to ask students how their parliament represents them. We then move on to the story of the lesson, what is being taught and how it's being taught, so that when a teacher walks into a classroom with our lesson, she walks in knowing what's going to happen in that lesson. In this slide, you'll notice a red bar on the left. That indicates this is a teacher instruction slide and is not to be projected or shown to students. This is for use by teachers, and this is how we almost subversively train teachers. We have these hints peppered throughout our lesson that show teachers what to do. We then move on to the why of the lesson, because it's only when the teacher and the learner both understand why the lesson is important that the teacher will focus on the crux of the matter while teaching it, and the students will learn the concepts flawlessly. Kevin talked about the 3 C's of learning, and they are a key aspect of CGC. We lay out the goals in every lesson. Every lesson starts out with laying out conceptual, competency, and character goals for that lesson, as well as in the context of the larger unit. The goals for the current lesson are highlighted, and for later lessons are grayed out. The assessment for this lesson is easily framed because it must test that the students have understood the concepts. They must also be competent in the material covered in the competency goals. So we have the conceptual goals, we have the competency goals, and the character goals. And a fun point, when we were designing for India, we contextualized even the icons of the 3 C's to India by using an elephant for conceptual, a monkey for competence, and a deer for character. The reason we did this was animals play a large role in our storytelling ethos, and it's something that both teachers and students can identify with. After we lay out the goals, we jump into the lesson. Each lesson is divided into sections, and each section starts with an open-ended question, again to encourage inquiry among students. These are framing questions outlined by the CGC way of thinking. As Joe said, teachers are also first-generation learners, so we need to show them what inquiry-based thinking is as well, so that they can teach it effectively. Each section in the lesson addresses some of the goals from what we laid out at the beginning. In order to show teachers the link back to how the content addresses the goals, we list these goals at the beginning of every section, putting in the relevant icon so the teachers can make the connection back to the learning goals we outlined at the start. We then have how slides that teach the teacher how to run this section of the lesson. If it's an activity, we explain the activity. If it's a discussion, we give pointers on the discussion. Again, these are our sneak teacher training tools, and they are needed because these teachers have not been taught this way. And after that, we jump into the content. These slides don't have a red band on the left, and these are slides the students see. Our tech platform has an option for the teacher to toggle between teacher mode and student mode. And that brings us to how we use technology to deliver our solutions. I remember the first time Jo and I sat down about close to a year ago, she told me something I'll never forget. She said, in EdTech, the tech follows ed. And most EdTech organizations put the tech first. So we're very clear, we use tech to effectively deliver our education solutions. Our tech is designed for first-time mobile users, given our demographic. All our lessons, training modules, and other help for teachers in schools are available on our app. We integrate technologies that make the app easy to use for first-time mobile users. For example, we have voiceovers and navigation tools in local languages. We have animation-based onboarding and tutorials, but we also spend a lot of time thinking about the usability of the app so that while it's easy for first-time users, it also doesn't alienate users more familiar with technology. We've also designed our app and our tech for areas where internet is a challenge. Nowadays, sometimes it seems internet is a challenge everywhere, but most of our users do live and work in areas where connectivity is a problem. We recommend content based on technical constraints such as bandwidth and storage. Our apps are designed to work online as well as offline. But most importantly, our app allows devices to share content with each other even when there's no internet connection. So we've done this in multiple schools across the Northeast in India, where we ship them a device loaded with lessons. The teachers, each of whom have their own smartphones, or we get them tablets. They suck lessons from the single device we ship over to them, and they don't require internet at all to access and disseminate our content. So this together, what Kevin talked about, what Jo talked about, what I've shown, is the genesis of On Ground, the collaboration between Ontim, Meghshala, and CGC. The simplicity and system, the stickability and scale of training and delivery methodology is, we think, a formula for success. And it's what will give us a learning ecosystem for our times. But is that enough? And we all sat down and we said, no, it's not. What we want is a place-based learning ecosystem for our time. On Ground, therefore, works with any regional curriculum. The way we do it is we train a local cohort of teachers virtually or on-site, and that region could be a state, it could be a country, it could be a group of countries. The local cohort uses our existing modules, chapter plans, and lessons to create lessons contextualized to that country and situation. The lessons become available on our app for dissemination. And On Ground continues to support in-region activity through training and engagement. In every country that we step into, we work with local partners to bring the On Ground package to school groups, governments, schools, and teachers. And it is our partners who offer support, school acquisition, and outreach. The last thing we realized is that impact at scale requires community. And On Ground impact at scale because we are building a movement. Through a primarily virtual offering, including virtual trainings, we do not need significant feet on the street to start working with schools and teachers. We found that teachers teach each other in a way that is individual to a country, a state, a city, and even a school. And that is the power of community. As an example, we had trained about 100 teachers in a remote district of our home state, Karnataka, this February. We were surprised because shortly after, we saw over 1,500 touchdowns from that district on our app. And then we figured out those 100 teachers had trained 1,400 teachers more in a style and language that was deeply individualized to that community. And there is no group of 30 or 100 or even 1,000 people who can teach the 9 million teachers in India, the 60, 70 million teachers across the world. It has to be done through a movement, through a community, and through all of us coming together to make this happen. And that's what we believe will give us a global learning ecosystem for our times.
Great. Thank you so very much to the panelists. Thank you, Arjun. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Joe, for clearly for such great information and great examples. Clearly, we're going to open it now and really want to hear as much as we can about what these examples look like. It was great to see the classrooms, Joe, with all of your students and teachers. I love, Arjun, that you talked about these lessons being available without internet. I think that's so important right now, given where we are across the world. Access to internet, broadband is still actually an issue. So we're going to open up now. Andrea is going to open up so that we have everyone back together for questions. We can use the chat box, of course, but it would be great to see folks. So if you could get off mute and even on camera, and we just want to open it up now for your questions, for your thoughts, for your comments to the panelists. So I see many people, Gary and Kelly and Debbie, Shaduri.
While people are joining us, Winsome, I just want to
Yes.
make a comment to Joe, because I think it's good if the panelists disagree in public. Those kids in the bubble we don't need to worry about. No argument, we need to worry most about the kids outside the bubble, but I work in a lot of good schools where kids are disengaged, not using interesting methodology. You know what I mean? It's not,
Yes.
It's not that the kids in the better off schools are getting a great education. I mean, because I work mainly in those schools, and I mean, I love working with them, and some of them are doing great work. But the reason we're working together is we're not satisfied with what those kids are getting either. So just to say,
Relevant.
I think it's a really universal problem. So.
Yes.
No, I feel I have to agree with you again, Kevin. I also believe that as soon as I finish saying this, I wanted to say, well, these kids don't get a good education themselves.
That's great. So we do have a question in the chat from Gary. Gary says that you said teachers can customize the lessons for their context. How do they do that? And I think this is a great time to maybe give an example of what that looks like. How do teachers customize? Yes, Joe.
Shall I just introduce it, and Arjun will tell us about the tech, I think.
Sure.
So, teachers, like new chefs, don't know how to cook something up from the start. So if we have a lesson that's out there and it has the basic essentials of the way the kids should be taught up there, they can very easily take it and tweak it with their circumstances, their examples, their names, their monies, all those sort of things. And they can produce a lesson that they are proud of, right? So to do that, we use tech. Arjun, go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Joe. Great question, Gary. So it's at the essence of it, we have a very complex content management and dissemination system that lets us deliver content differently in different regions. The process of how it happens is, as Joe said, we have, all our content is available in terms of documents for the modules and the module plans and slides for the presentation. So when we work with teachers, we make the material available to them. We give them slides in an editable format. We give them the overarching plan that was where we started before we did the lessons, and then they can chop and change the lessons as they need. Once that process is completed, the model we have right now is we work with the cohort who we've trained, so we know they get what we're doing. They give the lessons back to us, we review them, and then we upload them onto our platform. And then, if it's lessons for a specific country, we make sure that the lessons built for a country only become visible to users in that country.
I just give Gary a complimentary answer, obviously. We worked through the whole summer synthesizing CGC thinking with on-term thinking, with Meghshala thinking. And we see this as a phased model, almost certifying schools to work at different levels in a way. In schools using the full kind of CGC module, I'll just give an example. I just worked with the grade 2 team here. The module was called, How Does Where We Live Affect How We Live? And the sample module from CGC was very global. We Honduranized it, the grade 2 team and I, we turned it into a Honduran place-based module. We looked at how does where we live affect how we live in the different regions of Honduras, was part 1. Then we said, how does where we live affect how we live in a pandemic? Because the impact of the pandemic was very different depending on your local circumstances. And thirdly, we had just had 2 successive hurricanes. And the third part was, how does where we live affect how we live in a climate crisis? So we took a global model and we localized it for Honduras so that the kids who, some of them, one of their school divisions actually closed because of the flooding, had absolutely local experience. So whether it's at the somewhat simplified on-ground level, because we're phasing people towards inquiry, or the more full-on inquiry, we give global models which are customizable. It's funny because people think we do curriculum, but as Arjun said earlier, we're almost curriculum agnostic in that these frames and ways of thinking, you could take, like I say, I talked to the Chilean National Council last week. I'm meeting them again tomorrow. If you wanted to, you can take the Chilean national curriculum and drop it into these ways of thinking. So, and then there are various levels of localization and customization available because they need to be. So at the Indian level or more globally, it's all designed to be customizable.
So, thank you, Kev. Yes, thank you, Gary. Go ahead.
Can they edit it on their phones? Because I imagine that in a lot of rural areas, they don't even have laptops, right? So I'm wondering if they can just do everything on their smartphone or they need more tech than that.
So, as Kevin said, Gary, it's we're looking at a phased approach. So in our, where we want to eventually get to is every teacher can edit lessons on their smartphone. The way we're thinking about it right now, I think there's a follow-on question from Moira that to transfer the model to other countries who will input the national curriculum. The teachers do this. I'll take both together. The model we're thinking of right now is when we enter a country, like Kevin said, what CGC did with our group of teachers for part of on-term over summer, we spent days training and brainstorming and understanding what we were doing and then building our lessons. We envision doing that in every country we enter. We pick up a group of 20 or 30 or 40 teachers, train them, work with them, get them to build the contextualized lessons for that region, and then disseminate those. And then our next phase would be giving individual teachers the ability to adapt lessons on a per school basis.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. Tracy has her hand raised. I'm going to push the allow to talk button.
Okay, great. Tracy?
Oh, I must have done that by accident. I apologize. But if given the opportunity, I do have one kind of a meta question. Perhaps Kevin can respond to this. Have you thought about using this same structure for teacher training in universities? Basically taking the exact same structure, but having teachers live the experience of students first. Because the main criticism seems to be that what Joy was pointing out is that teachers teach the way they have been taught. But if they would live this experience, maybe from a student perspective, they would have a deeper appreciation of its utility. I just think your work is brilliant, and I would just love to see it scaled even by universities applying this to teacher education programs.
Yeah, I thank you for the opportunity to answer. All of the CGC teacher training and the work we did together over the summer in synthesis is done using our own methodologies. We actually have learning modules for adults. One of them I just completed and delivered to the teachers in, I say delivered, but you know what I mean, we do it together. In Honduras, it's called So What's So Good About Inquiry? Understanding how we build conceptual understanding. And I only teach it through the same methodology that we are asking them to use with the kids. So I'll literally say, okay, now we're going to connect to prior knowledge. If I say guided inquiry, what are the first 5 words that pop into your head? And then we team it, and then we build a concept map of guided inquiry. So it's exactly what you're saying, Tracy, because there's nothing worse than the lecturer who lectures for 3 hours about collaborative learning or about inquiry-based methodology. So we said, nope, however tough, we will always practice what we preach. So we only teach teachers to use inquiry by using inquiry when we're teaching teachers. So we can say, what I'm asking you to do is what I'm doing now. Look at what I'm doing now. And then we get metacognitive about it, or meta. And we just keep, Michael Fullan said about school leaders, on the dance floor, on the balcony, on the dance floor, on the balcony. So we explicitly teach inquiry only using inquiry. So I guess we're on exactly the same page with that, Tracy. The challenge in creating system is it really needs to include school accreditation. I do a lot of work with accrediting agencies on principle-based accreditation. School leadership training. We've just finished our 3rd cohort of Why Lead, we call it. Teacher training and teacher training colleges, and curriculum design, and working with kids and parents, and getting the tech in place. You miss anything out from that human ecosystem, it'll never quite be as good as it should be. And it maybe the biggest stumbling block is teacher education. But just on our scale, I can only answer for what we do, Tracy. We teach inquiry using inquiry, because that seems to be the only non-hypocritical way to do what we do.
Great, thank you, Kevin. I'm going to read a question. It's right from the chat. It's from Mary Lou. Mary Lou says, I work with teachers of a community in Guatemala on complexity education with non-computational devices, and the work goes similar to yours. But she says, for us, the main problem is economic support. What do you suggest poor communities, well organized though, how can they overcome it? A feasible example of this would be very helpful, she says. What do you suggest poor communities who are well organized can do to overcome this? Anyone?
Joe, Arjun, do you want to go first?
I wish I could tell you I know how to do this. I've sort of totally, because I just blundered in where angels fear to tread. I'm able to keep finding the economic support that schools need. And there are certain laws in the country that forces people to give 2% of their profits to doing useful work for, and it's very carefully mandated and it's looked out for. I don't know if those things exist in Guatemala. And the economic support is always tough to come by in countries that need it. Of course, there are a few countries like ours, I think, which have very rich people and a large number of really poor people. But in general, if there are poor communities, it's very unlikely that there are very, very rich people that can hand over money. So perhaps going outside this, outside your country for funding is something. I'm not sure, is that the question? Does my answer actually answer your question? Was that what you were meaning?
Yeah, thank you. It's wait a second, I will open my yeah, actually, hello, good morning. It is quite complex because the community I work with, they are nearby the city, the capital, And since they are like around 50 kilometers far away from the capital, they are in between the line of ONGs working with communities. They are considered to be too close to the capital, so they don't get any funding, but they are actually, because they are poor, 50 kilometers to travel to the capital to get whatever is expensive. So they have some schools that are private inside, but the public schools are quite poor, most of them. So the teachers do not receive any training, no money for supplies, no nothing, right? So they are schools that are really in poor condition, though they are very well organized. As a community, they are very strong. And the problem usually is economic. Yeah.
Yeah, one response, Marilu, is working in Honduras. We've approached first a group of 800 private schools, but low fee paying private schools. It's the Association of Bilingual Schools in Honduras. There are 800 of them. We're translating everything into Spanish. We have my wife is Honduran, so we have a Spanish speaking team. Mm-hmm. And because language is obviously an obvious barrier.
Yes, I do too, in both languages.
Yeah. So, and then our hopeful avenue is international schools, low fee paying independent schools, public schools. The low fee paying independent schools provide the financial resources, because the app that Arjun talked about is very low cost for schools, but the scale is so large that it generates income for us. The goal then is we can use that kind of funding to get into the schools that may not be able to pay anything. If we can't get grants, government support and that kind of thing, we kind of have to generate our own funding by reaching that intermediate group of schools that are not the very wealthy international schools, but they're not the very poor public schools, because there's so many of them. I don't know about Guatemala, Marilu, but like I said, there are 800 bilingual schools in Honduras. Yeah. That might seem to be, they may seem to be a bridge between the wealthier schools and the schools who have almost no resources. So it's kind of long-term strategy to reach those schools.
This is kind of like two levels of organization, right? What would be the find the funding, and then and then the educational one,
kind of international schools, independent schools, public schools, and because we have to be smart about this. Right now we need to finish a lot of our curriculum work. We have some subjects not quite finished. I have to find funding for that, so
true.
So
thank you so much.
Yeah. And if I can just add another point, what we've done in government schools in India, we go in, we typically have a project funded for a year or 2 years, and we spend our funding to work with teachers on the ground and train them in those 2 years. Once our funding ends for a project, even if we leave the area, we never yank access to the app and all the content from the teachers. And we found that if we spend our money wisely, for a year or 2 years, we then give them the tools they need to keep on doing what we train them to do. So the model is more, for communities that can't afford it at all, the model is let's get funded for a certain amount of time, but after that, they can sort of run with it on their own. So it's not that we need continuous funding to be able to work with these communities.
Yeah, what I do is like the devices that they use is made with the materials in the community itself. But the problem is the training actually per se, right? You need to have the people to gather the people, to bring people from other communities that are organized also. That's the main trick, right? The transportation and mobility is one of the main stuff, right? But thank you so much.
We've put our emails on the chat box, Marilu, and maybe if you can write to us, we can have further conversations on this.
That'd be great. That's a great connection. Thank you. So there's another question. It's maybe starting with you, Joe, on this one. How is this education received after students graduate from it across India? What do students go on to do? I think is kind of what the question is asking. How's it received or recognized?
How is the education recognized when a student leaves the school, I think? Moira, is that what you meant?
Say that again, Joe?
I think it was, how is this recognized when a student
Yes, how is it
leaves school?
recognized? Yes.
You know, we follow the national curriculum, actually, Moira. So we build the national curriculum. So right now what we do is we're building the Indian national curriculum, but we're using the theories and all the bells and whistles that Kevin uses to make it a vibrant learning opportunity, you know. So they're taught very well, but they are taught in the national curriculum kind of way. And they don't miss either, because what is national curriculum but a series of topics that they have to remember to write an exam with, usually. Certainly in the global South, that is the way national curricula are, you know, shared with the students.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Yeah, Gary says if they work, there aren't theories anymore. Gary didn't want to put you, I think you meant that for everyone. You want to share a little bit on that, Gary?
No, I just noted that Jyoti said, you know, we're implementing the theories and it seems like they're working. So it's not a theory anymore. It's engineering.
Yeah.
I noticed that Prakriti Ranjan has his or her hand up.
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are. We can hear you.
Hey, first, I'm Prakriti. I work with the Delhi government. Before I ask my question, I'd like to congratulate all the panelists. It was really enlightening to hear about you know, inquiry-based approach and how we've piloted it in, you know, so many different parts of the world. Right now, the Delhi government has a few really exciting new projects in which we're trying to move away from the traditional way of learning. We're trying to move towards programs of inquiry. We're trying to move towards, you know, a learning outcome-based approach. We're trying to move towards a place where we enhance student agency, where lessons are not as didactic as they used to be. So this sort of a paradigm is radically different from what we're used to, where we're used to, you know, high stake examinations, where we're used to mugging up, we're used to rote learning. So I think one of the challenges that we're facing is you know, outreach to the parent community, right? We recognize that it's very important for us to involve our parents into, say, the school community. So how do, like, normal schools who, you know, switch over to, say, a different kind of approach, like, you know, an inquiry based approach, what are the strategies that we use to reach out to parents? What are the strategies that we use to, you know, involve parents more in schools? How do we deal with that?
Can I kick off, Joe and Arjun?
Sure, go ahead.
Hi, Prakriti. What we do, and I've just done a LinkedIn post about it called "We Don't Need to Educate Our Parents." I think we have a tradition that is not Indian, it's really international, of the genius leaders come up with a school change and then we have to tell our parents about it. I noticed that our parents are often better educated than we are sometimes. We approach it very differently. We need to co-create meaning with our parents. So what we literally do, honestly, school by school, we invite parents into parent sessions, but they're led through inquiry. There's a wonderful startup school in Ecuador I'm working with, very small. It's called Mine, as in mine, yours, ours, the Mine School. So we invited parents in with questions like, if mine is the answer, what was your question? What did you never get from school that you would want from a school? Here's what we'd like to give your children. We have the same techniques with teachers and parents. We get them to draw their learning stories from their own education, turn those into messages for educators. So we invite parents in, Prakriti, not to give them a lecture about the new model, but to engage them in the kinds of learning that we do. We teach them the 3 C's by finding out what they're expert in. We say, who's in the room? Oh, this lady's an architect. What ideas do architects deal with? Okay, you're a learning expert. We're creating every one of your kids as a learning expert. So we deal with them very directly, using the methodologies that we're talking about rather than here are methodologies, any questions. Do you see what I mean? We approach it in the way we approach learning. We see it as parent learning, and we invite them in, but using the same tone, the same culture, the same spirit of inquiry. And a consultant friend of mine says, that might seem risky, but I've never had a room that let me down. And I would say the same. I always go into those parents. I just did one in International School of Arizona. I'm thinking, I don't know parents in Arizona. What are they like? I've never had a room that let me down. If you approach parents as people, to the heart, from their own experiences, it's far more effective than just lecturing them about a new methodology.
Right. I think that's something that we've also felt in the process of parent outreach. I think initially we sort of started with these, didactic sermons that we'll just call all the parents in, and we'll go on like huge. We'll have like 30 like a 30-slide deck to take them through, and that did not generate as much response. Then we started engaging with them in groups. So we went into the communities, into their neighborhoods, and started speaking to them about it. That had like a marginally better outcome, like there was more positive reception to it. And then finally what we did was we didn't have parent specific sessions, but we did invite some of our parents into the classroom. So not to say that all parents have been covered, but those who have come into our classrooms have sort of participated in the activities that the students have been doing. I think you're right in saying that there's like more fruitful thought occurring in those spaces than just like a sermon.
That's because inquiry is better for people, not just students. It's what Tracy was saying. We use our own methodologies for all stakeholders, not just the kids.
Yeah, I think it's like going forward. I think one of the biggest learnings from like our experience, and I think that sort of got validated by your answer and say the presentation before this, was that we'll probably want to move towards institutionalizing this practice. I think that's the way forward for us.
Yeah, and Prakriti, if I can just add something to that. You remember we said that when we taught 100 teachers, the 100 teachers were so fascinated by a webinar. They'd never used a webinar in their lives, but they managed to fix their minds around it. They decided they knew how to use it, and they got 10 of their friends and they practiced webinar, running a webinar with them, and they taught them how to use Meghshala, and they were away and running before you knew it. They were downloading our app and they were using it freely and talking about it among themselves. They made WhatsApp groups. It was just fabulous to watch. And you could do the same with parents. You can tell parents to talk to other parents, and you can make little groups of parents. And every now and then you would have a sort of, I think it's a sort of trickle down structure, so that you keep feeding up to different levels, and you just have to let the message go at one place and it'll trickle through the whole thing, the whole group. Yeah,
I think in terms of scalability, that's really great suggestion, because we do have SMCs in place, which are like elected parent bodies, and usually even like before the inquiry based approach, if we had to disseminate anything or like any new initiative came, like we reached the parent community through the SMCs. So I think like a similar tiered approach might just work for us given the scale that we operate at. So I think that's really helpful. Thank you so much.
Right. You could reach me over the phone anytime you want, and we can chat. I'm sure you said you were from Delhi, right? So Vikram has my number. You can just
I'll reach out to him.
Thank you, guys. We are at time. It's been a fascinating discussion. Thank you for the presentations, Joe and Arjun and Kevin today. The session is being recorded, so we'll have this up on our website sometime next week. We will, Joe, we have your PowerPoint, and I think we'll be posting that PowerPoint too with the webinar. Am I correct, Joe?
Yeah.
Great.
You have it, but it's part of the PowerPoint with Arjun, so you don't have to use that also.
Okay, but we're free to share.
Yeah,
Oh,
we
sure.
sent them in for that purpose, Winsome. So you
That's
have everything.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Just want
Yeah.
everyone to know that we'll be able to share with you the
Yeah.
video recording, but
Great.
also the PowerPoint
Great.
presentations. So we are at time, and again, we thank everyone for joining us. We're also asking you to join G Solon by becoming a regular participant. I just want to know if Bob, you or Andrea want to have any last minute word for the panelists and for the audience.
No, just please make sure please make sure we have your email and we'll keep you posted.
That's right.
Thank
Andrea?
you so much, everyone. Just thanks for the great session.
Yes.
Thanks,
And
everybody.
Yes, have a great day, afternoon, evening, night. Thank you all.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank
Bye,
you.
thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye, good people.